This episode is brought to you by Portland Distro. If you like underground music, movies, and more, go to portlanddistro.com for licensed merch, vinyl, CDs, and more. Plug in the discount code 10OFF, TENOFF, for a 10% discount at portlanddistro.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Everything Went Black podcast. Welcome all. Thank you for everyone who has continued their support of the Patreon efforts. We're doing a lot of cool stuff over there. For as little as $1 a month, you can support the show and get bonus episodes. For $5 a month, you can get bonus episodes plus early access to the normal feed. And for $25 a month, you can be a sponsor. And that means that if you have a business, a band, some kind of project that you want to promote on this show, for $25, I will give you a custom read at the front end of the show before we get into the episode. And, you know, I know that $25 is a big investment. So you can do for 1 month, you can do for 2 months, you choose. Before we get started, I also want to shout out our brethren, the 4 horsemen of the podcast apocalypse. And of course, I'm referring to Into the Necrosphere, hosted by Jackie Smith, Horror Wolf 666, hosted by Brandon Legion, who was a recent guest on this show. And Jackie is actually going to be a guest in the next couple weeks too. So we're keeping the good vibes rolling. And of course, last but not least, we have Necromaniacs, a horror podcast that I co-host with my old friends, Mike Scandato and Jeff Kashid. Speaking of old friends, this episode features Steve Williams of Init Records, a Midwest-based independent music label. Steve and I go way back, way back. He released an EP by my former band, Anodyne. And he's just been a guy that's been around. He's booked shows. I'd run into Steve all the time on the road. He's booked shows for Anodyne. I believe he's booked shows for Tombs in the very beginning. And I just had an opportunity of reconnecting with Steve on this last run through the country that we did with Origin and Abysmal Dawn and Calitorus. We got to hang out in Minneapolis, where he is now living. And it was like we'd never been apart. It was like it's like no time had passed. It was really great. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. Definitely check out Steve's label, Init Records. And we talk about his label. We talk about independent music and a bunch of cool philosophical things. Steve, it was great seeing you a few weeks back on tour.
Yeah, likewise. It's been a long time.
The coolest thing about it, though, is that it really felt like no time had passed.
Agreed. There's not too many people. I feel like when you run into people, it's just like you saw them yesterday. And I feel like that's definitely been our relationship over the last 2 decades.
It's crazy to think that it's been that long too, you know?
Yeah.
You know, and like, it's cool. Like pretty much everything was the same, except I discovered some personal things about you. Like you got married, which I didn't know. And just because I haven't been very active on like Facebook or any social media for the last few years, aside from just like posting stuff about, you know, the band and the podcast. So I kind of fell behind the information stream a little bit. So congratulations. Everything seems cool.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I didn't make it's weird doing stuff like that during a pandemic too. So it's not like it was, I don't post too much personal stuff on the internet anyway. Mostly just label stuff or shows, bands that I'm stoked on.
Yeah. Now, I actually, you and I have known each other for like at least 20 years, I think, right?
For sure. At least.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little longer.
We met in Mankato, right?
Yeah, I did an Anodyne show.
Yeah.
It would have been on the first Quiet Wars tour.
Right on. Yeah. I'm trying to like figure all this stuff out. You know, I'm getting old. You know, my memory's starting to fade. I'll probably be dead soon. So
Well, hopefully not, but I also understand because I'm also getting old and my memory is not what it used to be.
yeah. So yeah, it's I don't know, man. It's been cool. I like running into you and people from. I don't know. It's just like these days, everything seems so disposable in our society. Like things come and go so quickly, and you cycle through people. People enter your life, and then they disappear. And, they lose interest in stuff, and then I always celebrate the relationships I have with people that I've known for a long time. And it's cool to run into you, and things aren't any different. And on the same tour, I ran into Jamie Getz up in Vancouver. Once again, the same scenario. It felt like we just saw each other like a couple weeks ago and nothing had really changed.
Yeah, I agree. I think as you get older, it's not only our society's more disposable, but I think people grow and change. And one of my big struggles is just being involved in punk and hardcore metal, and people get out of it so fast, or their priorities change once they get married, start families. They just stop going to shows, stop buying records, stuff like that. And it's a disconnect because that's all I want to do. That's all I'm into.
So when did you start the label? Because I want to talk about Init Records. And, that's doing labels is harder and harder, especially if you're dealing with tactile product like CDs and LPs and things like that. So you and I have worked together on a release for Anodyne, and that was I don't know, it's got to be like 15 years ago at least at this point.
Yeah, it was 2003 or 2004.
It's almost 20 years ago, man.
Yeah. So, I started the label technically in 2000, but the first record, was the end of 2000, and the first release was a Vita Blue CD, later became 10 Grand. And that didn't come out till February 2001. And basically been doing it. There's been periods where it's more active than others. The last couple of years, I think with the pandemic, I only put out a couple records. And it's definitely slowed down. As I get older, I think the biggest thing is I just don't want to just put out bands that send me demos. I've never wanted to do that. I want to put out bands that I know the people, that I've met, that I've seen, that I like. And as you get older, it's harder because all my friends when I was younger who were playing in bands, now they have families. They don't play in bands. They don't tour, which is, another thing why it's just so great when I, knowing that you're still out there doing it, and I'm going to run into you every couple of years, and it's going to be like nothing changed.
Well, moving forward, it's going to be probably more than every couple of years. Now that things are in full swing again, we got other tours coming up this fall. I think we're going to be running through your part of the country again. And you're just going to keep things rolling. So it feels good to be out there again because, frankly, the last couple of years, there was so much doubt in everyone's mind about whether or not music was even going to be a thing anymore, live music,
Yeah, and luckily it is, and it's seems like we're on the right track to, getting back to as normal as we can.
Now,
or we want to.
When I look back at, records and, the culture surrounding, small labels and independent music. I look at these different eras of, the 80s, the 90s, and then, post 21st century. In the 80s, that was kind of the beginning of the whole independent music world. You had Discord, SST, Alternative Tentacles. And the whole DIY culture kind of sprang from that. And then the 90s is when it really sort of, became a more prominent subculture. And then you had all these distros, like Mortem and Very Distro and, Lumberjack and all this. It was easier to put records out. And also there was more of a network of things going on. And then post-millennium, I think a lot of that's changed. So do you have any reflections on that, being a guy who is still involved in releasing independent music?
For sure. And, my day job is a record store for 22 years too. So, I've seen the ebbs and flows, professionally and, my hobby, which is the label. But I think that's true. I think, SST, Discord, all the bands in the 80s, the whole DIY movement sparked the 90s, which was just insane. Every band put out a 7-inch, not just punk bands and hardcore bands, but every band. That's how they could get their music out the most affordable. There wasn't CDRs. That technology and CDs were still expensive. And then, as it enters the early aughts, once digital, it's just killed it a lot, honestly. And now there's a little vinyl resurgence, but the vinyl resurgence, everyone talks about that, and everyone wants to put out their records on vinyl. You got like singer-songwriters come in and they bring in me their record, and I'm just like, what do you do? Well, I play a coffee shop once a month. And I'm like, why did you put this record out? Like the stuff that's selling is like, there's a disconnect when people are like, oh, you put out vinyl records, people must be buying those galore. And it's like, what people are really buying right now is, major label stuff, large indie stuff, large metal stuff. But I feel like the online gets bigger. It's just, it's so much stuff just hit at you. I feel like it's harder to discover, or it's harder to absorb, I should say. It's easy to discover new music, but it's hard to absorb it because you're just getting blasted on social media, from online publications just constantly. And the game is all, PR. It's kind of more big business, even if it's, underground. Which, in the late 90s and early aughts, it really wasn't. It was, there's some message boards, but it was more like a network of touring, and, people would say, oh, check this band out, or you'd read a review in like Heart Attack or a print magazine, which just, very little of that happens these days too, other than Decibel.
It's funny. I oftentimes think that the introduction of, and this is going to sound, I got to be careful. I don't know who's listening. So, Katie, if you're out there, no offense, but I kind of feel like, the advent of PR injected into independent music is good and bad. Let's be, political about it here. It's good because, if you're out there doing your thing and you have like this organization behind you, promoting you, that's awesome. You get nice features, you get put on, these like playlists, things like that, and I really appreciate that, but on the other hand, it's the job of that person to, they have to execute the scope of work. They have a certain number of bands, some of those bands might be awesome, and hardworking and doing their thing. And some bands might be kind of mediocre, but they still get the same attention, you know what I mean? And that's just doing your job. You have to do that. And I remember even back, like, I don't know, the early, like maybe 2001 or 2, when, even Anodyne on the microscopic level that we operated at, we had someone working PR. And I just remember we were in the practice space one day and we were talking about that, and it was like, what the hell is PR, man? Like, who is going to care about like this band, But there was like a guy that was hired to work the record, and it was the beginning of that whole exposure to that for me. And I remember going to a show one time in the city to see Gates of Slumber. And did you ever know those guys?
I don't know. I know the name, but I've never listened to him.
My dear friend who passed a few years ago, Jason McCash, was the bass player, one of the founding members of the band, and also Bob Fouts played in that band, and sadly he passed away a few years ago too. And they're guys from Indianapolis. They were like,
oh yeah, okay. I do know that band. I think I did see him at a Dude Fest. Actually,
yeah, that makes sense. They were like,
I know the name. Yeah,
they were in Burn It Down. I know you know them. Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
And I remember going to the show, and it was like in the basement room of Webster Hall, and it was nice. That's a cool spot to play. It's like maybe 200 people, something like that, and it was filled with industry people, and I was like, it blew my mind because I was like, I'd never really experienced anything like that on that level. And I think that in a lot of ways, it kind of softens the impact of the better bands when everyone's being pushed at like an equal level. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's weird because I feel like go back to Anodyne, I feel like in the late 90s and the early it was more the label doing the PR themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
It was like someone at the label hitting up college radio, records. I mean, working at a record store in the early, 2000, 2001, 2002 when I started, like we would get posters for the bands playing in town. We would get a promo CD. This band's playing your market, from small labels, and it was more like the label doing the PR. And now I feel like it's just, how much money do you have? Everyone has access to PR, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just, how much money do you have, really? That's what it kind of comes down to. And when vinyl's going up, small label, like, man, every time I've done paid for PR, it gets a lot of attention, or you get a lot of like features on websites, but it doesn't really equate to sales.
Yeah, that's the kind of point I was trying to make. Is you don't.
Yeah, and I try to get that to bands, and that's all they care. They just care about where it is, but it doesn't equate to sales. I always say, you play shows, you sell records. I can do whatever, but in some of the PR is just like, well, I've had no problem getting my stuff into Decibel without PR. All because I put out an Anodyne CD, I believe, because that's the first thing they ever reviewed of mine.
Really?
Yeah. Yep. So
that's funny.
Yeah, and that was actually my first exposure to Decibel too. I've never seen it before. I mean, in Mankato, it's not like, we had a stream of, magazines at Barnes. Our Barnes and Noble was small. That's like where I had to go to get music magazines, other than what the record store was selling, which was Punk Planet and Heart Attack and Maximum Rock and Roll. And I remember seeing this magazine. I just picked it up, and there was the review for that Anodyne CD, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, this is the magazine for me too, because they're like talking about Botch, and they're talking about ISIS and Anodyne and Playing Enemy, and I'm like, this is clearly the magazine for me.
Oh,
but
yeah,
like,
man, totally. I mean, Decibel's like, one of they're an important publication for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yes. And, I kind of view the whole print thing as the same as like physical media. It's part of physical media, and it's so important, because when you don't actually have anything to hold, what do you really have? Like, and my wife says I'm a hoarder because I have a record collection, and and I have all these CDs and stuff, but it's organized. It's not like I'm saving newspapers, but like,
newspapers.
But like, what do you have? Like something pulls out as streaming, and you don't have that anymore. You don't own it. And then, my worry, and this is like a little conspiracy theorist, but like, what happens when they don't want you to have access to stuff?
No,
that's
totally,
a little.
dude.
That seems far-fetched in America to a lot of people, including myself. But it's also there too. Like, if you don't actually own anything, it's like the, 1984. You don't have those books anymore. You don't have the records. You don't have the CDs. You
actually hit on something very interesting, because, and like, I don't know if this is actually true or not, so I'm saying that with a disclaimer. But a few years ago, I remember some big R&B star was actually changing the mixes that were being posted for their releases. Like, they were,
Yeah.
Was that real?
I believe it. Don't quote me on this either, because I'm not. I believe it was Kanye West, Life of Pablo.
That makes sense, because that guy's out of his mind.
I think that's what one it was. Yeah, he's crazy. He's batshit. He sucks. He's a terrible human. So, but yeah, I believe that. You're absolutely right. I do believe that's true.
So that sparked my distrust of streaming, too, because part of it's like, what the fuck's up with that, man? Like, I just, like, for me personally, I make a record, it's out. I might like it, I might not like it. There might be things 10 years later I want to change, or I want to erase certain things, but it's part of the continuum of reality, and you can't. Things start getting slippery when you have access to change things like that, and I don't really support that,
Yeah, for sure. Then you end up with shit like Star Wars and E.T., where they fucking changed the scenes from your childhood.
That's a real thing too.
Right? Yeah.
I didn't know that.
George Lucas, went back and redid this first Star Wars movies and added in the new characters from the prequels and stuff. And
fuck
E.T.
that,
got
man.
changed where they took the guns out and put walkie-talkies in their hands.
Dude, that's no good.
And then he went back and changed. Steven Spielberg went back and changed it and was like, I'm never going to change my movies again. But it's like a snapshot of history. Like I've put out ugly fucking records and CDs, especially in the early aughts. I'm not going to single anything out to make any bands feel bad, but I used to just, hey, if this is a band's artwork, that's great, you know? Like, if this is what they want, I'm not going to, who am I to say no? And now I'm a little more involved. If you send something that it's really ugly or really bad or doesn't really make sense, I might speak up. You know, I really don't feel like this is the right move, you know? Which I've rarely had to do, luckily.
Yeah, no, that's cool, though. Whether you're getting involved on an aesthetic level, you know, that's great.
Yeah, it is a snapshot of stuff. And, like, you know, there's stuff that I love that, you know, some punk rock stuff that, you know, I loved from when I was in high school. I still like it, even though I know that it's not very great musically. You know what I mean? Like, it's sloppy or it's just kind of, you know, cringy lyrics or whatever it might be. But, like, it's like, hey, this is a time and a place. And that's what it kind of reminds me of, too, you know? So I think, like, physical media is important because you actually hold it. And yeah, you can't change it because what happens when somebody doesn't want you to have access to certain stuff, you know? And if it's all digital, someone can just erase it.
Well, you know, 10 years ago, I probably would have said, "Oh, Steve, pshaw, that'll never, you know, what are you talking about? That's paranoid." But with how out of control, you know, censorship is these days, I think you're onto something about that, you know? And furthermore, I'm a big fan of Joe Bob Briggs. You know, I watch his, he has a show on Shudder called The Last Drive-In, which is all, you know, you know, horror films. Like a lot of it's like kind of schlocky B-movie stuff, but also he brought the same point up about movies, like horror films, like obscure exploitation films and, you know, things like that, grindhouse movies, which, you know, are not always PC. They're, you know, going to offend people. And he's like, yeah, hang on to your Blu-rays and DVDs of these things or your VHS tapes because you never know when someone's going to decide that this is not suitable for everyone and they're just going to get rid of it. So I'm down with that, man. I have tons of that shit too, you know? Yeah, and I'm not like a weird conspiracy theorist, but I just feel like what happens when you don't have access to the stuff you want if you rely all digital? And it's not even that. It's, you know, I have people that sell me their CD collections at work. Oh, I put everything on a hard drive. I don't need these anymore. Man, I've lost 3 hard drives over the last 10 years, you know, because I upload all my CDs. I buy a CD, put it in my iTunes, and then I use iTunes Match, and I can stream it at work while I'm doing orders and sitting at my computer in my office, you know, or on my phone if, you know, I don't want to listen to the CDs in my car. Like, you know, there's a spot for digital, there's a spot for streaming. You know, you can check out new bands. I think Bandcamp is awesome, but at some point, like, you know, nothing should be replacing the physical media in my personal view. Yeah, it's what are your thoughts on all this kind of, like, you know, subtle, like, passive aggressive, like, censorship that's going on? That's the worst part about it. Well, you know, the whole "it can't happen here," clearly based on, you know, what's happened in the Supreme Court recently, it can happen here. Like, you know, we're not as, you know, free as people really think, or, you know, I hear a lot like, well, that can't happen. That'll never happen in my lifetime. So many things over the last, you know, 8 years have happened that people said, oh, that'll never happen in this country. So could the censorship thing happen? Yeah, like, yeah, but even if you want to say, oh, that's far-fetched, you know, Mike and Steve, I don't know what you're talking about, you know, you're really, you know, out there, like, you know, probably won't happen. But also, just what if a band just doesn't exist anymore, and who controls that stuff, right? Yeah. So, like, if something is digital only and the members die over the years, and I'm talking, you and I are gone, like, how's the next generation gonna, like, what if the Minutemen never put out a physical thing, you know, Black Flag,
never put out a physical thing, and those members just moved on or died or just didn't exist anymore. Like, where's the next generation of discovering that? It's just, I don't know, maybe that's far-fetched.
No, it's not. And I'm a 90s guy, so like I'm paranoid, that's like that. Yeah. That was like the 80s and the 90s were all this, like, the more healthy version of conspiratorial thinking, I think, arose, where you started distrusting things. I'm not saying like we, in the 90s, we were in the level of some of the nut jobs around today, where now it's not fun to be into conspiracy theories anymore. It's actually it's actually dangerous and illegal. Correct. It causes like violent behavior right now. But
correct. Yeah, versus like aliens and
back
like
then, you'd read like one of the books that Feral House released or something, and you'd be like, huh, interesting. I wonder if like how much of this is true. But that's where that distrust of a healthy distrust of the government came from, that. And a distrust of authority and questioning things, not just accepting stuff. That came from that. Now, I don't want anyone to take this out of context and be like, oh, well, Mike's like, now he's a QAnon fucking guy. Like, he thinks the Democrats are like Satanists, like reptilian Satanists and stuff. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is that just like everything else, I want to know why. I want to know why. I want to I want to see documentation. I want to see proof for everything. That's what I'm saying. And like, that's kind of like fits into what we're talking about with music and physical media. It's like, if you're a band out there, all you have is like some MP3s on the internet, and that gets wiped out. Someone decides that, oh, well, this music isn't suitable for you to listen to anymore. We're getting rid of it. You didn't even fucking exist because you don't have like a record or any kind of proof or document that this even was a thing,
Or the server just doesn't exist anymore. The website host goes out of business. I mean, let's not even go into the conspiracy part of like censorship. Like, it's just lost in time. Like, if you don't, let's say they don't have a backup, let's say they don't know where the masters are.
Oh yeah.
Like, it's just gone. Like, and like the thing to me, and I feel like this is like the loss. I mean, artwork is so important to an album, not just a little tiny square on your phone, but holding artwork. To me, it's always been liner notes, and it's just weird to me. And I know you're the same way as I am on this, even though we're different eras of getting into music, is you would read those liner notes and you'd see like, what bands do these guys think? And
100%,
be like,
man, 100%.
I want to check that. Like, if this band is thinking these bands, like, I probably need to check these bands out. That's just a lost art. It just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, I guess you're right about that, man.
Doesn't happen. But also, like, I mean, people don't, I mean, I guess you can Google lyrics, but not for a lot of underground stuff, So, like, you don't have any lyrics to read. You don't have the liner notes. You don't have, like, I'm from, the ebullition era of hardcore that got me into hardcore. And it's like every song had explanations or, what these lyrics meant, stuff like that. It's just, to me, that was so like instrumental in really me becoming who I am today, both, political views and just, ethics, ethically, like, equal rights, all that. I probably wouldn't. I don't know. I mean, my parents are are very liberal, and I feel like they did a good job raising me. But I don't know if I would be as liberal or conscious about the politics if I wasn't into punk and hardcore and read the liner notes.
I 100% agree with that. And yeah, I mean, it's similar to me. My parents are not. Well, my mom is actually surprisingly liberal. But she's hiding underneath the blanket of being a Republican. However, she doesn't vote Republican, and she supports all these like pro-choice and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
My dad, though I love him dearly, is a fucking far right sort of guy. You know what I mean?
That's a bummer. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how far. I'm saying that with a little bit. It's a little bit of hyperbolic, hyperbole when I say that, but he voted for Donald Trump. He probably supports a lot of weird shit that I don't agree with. But the town I grew up in is like, very small minded, very, very right wing. It was like a former classmate of mine. So this lady that I grew up with, we went out for lunch one time over the holidays, and she was like, yeah, apparently like this town, Carmel, New York, was like the biggest stronghold of like Trump supporters in all of New York State or something like that. And I'm like, all right, yeah, it makes me look around again. I'm like, I could see that. I remember growing up. I remember being a punk rocker and being like one of 5 kids who listened to Black Flag in my high school, and running into trouble and the cops and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I get it, But that, once again, coming back to the point you're making, punk, hardcore, and punk lyrics and the sort of culture around that was very hugely formative, and even Black Flag, just even like the nihilistic viewpoint that I hold is, you could trace it all the way back to Greg Ginn and Rollins and Chuck Dukowski and that whole thing, this kind of liberal apoliticism that they've had,
Yeah, and if you didn't have the artwork, the lyrics, would it have been absorbed the same way?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, and the large format is definitely the way to go, and even more so. It's I'm a huge fan of Alex Gray's artwork, and yeah, great. You could look at it, you could follow him on Instagram. You could see his pieces, and it's it looks wonderful. Your computer, but I went to Cosm. I've been there several times. It's in upstate, the Hudson Valley, New York.
Okay, yeah,
and to see those pieces in large format is powerful, man. And the same thing can be said for a poster of an album artwork or the album artwork itself, and just the way that it should be presented to you in its complete, fully realized, fully actualized form. There's a certain power. There's a certain power with that.
It's a piece of art, and it should be viewed. It's not viewed like that in our culture, and even in the a lot of the underground scene, but it should be. I mean, what if you could only see Van Gogh pieces on a computer screen? They didn't exist in real life, or any art. What if there were new art museums? What if everything is just on a computer screen? What if that could very well happen?
Yeah,
it happened with music, and it's just, to me, it's weird that it's weird that our culture just doesn't appreciate music as an art form, I guess. And I feel like as time goes on and social media, and then new generations of kids, and I'm not like the old man shaking my fist on the lawn, but to me it's important that new people get involved and they discover this old music just like I did. The bands before, that existed before I got into punk rock and metal. It's so important, and they're not probably getting the same what's the word? It's not as like they're not getting the same impact, just online.
Yeah, 100%. So
and they're not absorbing it. You're not absorbing it as much either. I mean, when you buy a record, like, actually, this is something, as I get older, I end up buying more records. I have more disposable income than I did when I was younger. I spend a little less time sometimes with records and CDs. I don't listen, like when I buy a record as a kid, I'd just listen to that CD or record just over and over and over, because I didn't have, you've seen my record collection. I got so much. It's just, sometimes it is overwhelming. And one of the things I tried to do pre-pandemic, one of my goals was, just before the pandemic started, was like, oh, when I buy a record or a CD, I'm going to try to it's not like a reissue, but something new. I want to listen to it a bunch before I go to the next one, which I didn't do that good a job on, but listen to it online. It's just song. You're just bombarded with so much stuff.
Yeah. Traveling is a good, this digital stuff is good for traveling though, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah. But at home, I always listen to vinyl. That's for sure. Yeah. So are you the guy at the record store who, is like, when some kid comes up with like a Norma Jean record or something, you're like, well, you should really check out this other band, Botch, or something like that. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure.
Nice.
For
Good.
sure.
Good.
Like, I would never, one of my big things in when I was going to the Mankato had, when I got into music, they had one record store called Early November, which doesn't exist in Mankato anymore, but exists in Sioux Falls still, and Rapid City, Cheyenne, and Billings. And I worked for them for 13 years. But pre-working for them, when I was in high school, some of the staff were very snobby. They'd be judgmental. And I remember, I didn't get offended, but a lot of my friends just, once another store opened, there's a second store open in town, they went there instead because they were less, high fidelity-ish.
Right.
Snobs.
Yeah.
And I took that with a grain of salt. And they also kind of liked me. So they'd make fun of oh, you're buying a Lagwagon record? That band sucks. You should like the Descendants or whatever, And I took it with a grain of salt. Well, I'm still going to buy this Lagwagon record. But I'm going to listen to the Descendants, I'll buy a used Descendants record.
Right. Yeah. There's no reason why you can't listen to both, It's not like you can exclusively listen to one or the other. Yeah.
For sure, yeah. And so once I started working at a record store, I probably went in with a little snobby mentality, but as I got older and really more looked at it, once I got in there and I looked at it a business standpoint, I was like, well, fuck that attitude. Who cares what you listen to as long as you're buying physical media? And I think that was a culmination of physical media dying, CDs just dropping out, everything going digital. That really made me look who cares what they're buying? As long as they're buying it, that's going to keep, me employed, basically.
Right. Oh, yeah, totally.
Pre-vinyl, revival. So, yeah, for sure. If someone comes in, I'll never say, oh, fuck Norma Jean, Christian bullshit, botch ripoff, or whatever. I would never say that to the person. But yeah, be like, hey, if you like that, you should check this record out. And now they don't have to buy that record for $20. They can just go home and listen to it and come back and buy it if they like it,
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, that's the one good thing about it, about the digital streaming stuff is that you can check it out before making that purchase,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I had a guy like that when I was growing up too. He's been on this podcast several times. Malcolm from Trash American Style in Connecticut.
Okay.
The sadly, the store doesn't exist anymore. Not because of lack of interest, but from some shady dealings with the landlord. The store doesn't exist.
Oh,
but,
bummer.
Yeah, but his his presence is still out there. He's got a huge mail order. He does all of the. Yeah, like the WFMU record fairs. You'll see him all regional places like that. He's out there selling records.
Cool.
And he plays music and all this stuff. But yeah, he was pretty much most of the records in the news section would have a card in there for fans of XX, Y, and Z. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And I love that because, I would just go through just eager to find stuff. And I would just go through the punk and hardcore metal sections, and it's oh, this band sounds it was a Sistral record or something, and it's for fans of I forgot what they compared them to, but something, and you would, the album artwork looked cool, the name sounded cool, it was in the right section, and then it said that it sounded like these other bands, and it was like Pulling Teeth was if for listeners of Integrity or something like that,
yeah,
that kind of thing.
Yep.
And then when you would buy something and you would go to the counter, he would just be like, oh yeah, cool. Have you listened to this band? And the next time you came in, you'd think about it, maybe you'd ask your friends that if they'd heard this band, and then maybe you might see an article or in Maximum Rock and Roll or whatever. And you'd see an ad for it in Your Flesh magazine, and then you'd go and buy the record the next time you went through.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. In a way, I feel like podcasts have kind of picked up the slack for that in some ways.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know how much you listen to stuff like this, but the my buddy Jackie, who runs Into the Necrosphere, that's an extreme music podcast, and I have discovered so many bands through just listening to his show, and I think that I'm trying to put some a positive spin on all this, all this stuff,
sure.
where it's
yeah,
you know, even
it's not
though
all doom and gloom online, like digital isn't all doom and gloom, but
you know, and even though you can't, it's getting more and more rare to go into a record store and have that guy there. There are sources that will recommend stuff or make you aware of things that you might be into. And I'm using, you know, Jackie as an example because just personally, I've discovered so much stuff through him. You know, he talks every week. He's got an interview with some dude in a band that you may or may not even have heard of, but you get a personality to associate with the band. You get a sample of what their music sounds like, and then you decide, I want to, you know, seek this out. In the show notes, they'll have like Bandcamp links, you know, and you could order vinyl and all that sort of stuff. And it's like that's the one good thing about all this, and that has like a way, you know, like a really long arm when it comes to reaching people. But you know, maybe it's just me and the generation I grew up in. I just need personal contact too. You know, like stuff that you just hear about remotely is like not as impactful as like the up close and personal, like seeing a band live and that kind of stuff is really still
for
where
sure
it's done, you know. Agreed.
Yeah, for sure. Which, you know, brings back to the label thing is just like that's you know, one of the things that I'm not as active. I don't put out as many bands because you know, yeah, I don't know as many people playing in bands. And the other aspect is there's just so many labels that weren't really on the scope. You know, 15 years ago weren't as big of powerhouses as they are now. You know, there's so many big indie labels, and they just, you know, basically, you know, pick every band up. You know, if you look at like something like Translation Loss and Prosthetics, they put out new two records, two bands I've never heard of, new bands every month. You know. Every month they've got new stuff coming out of new bands. They just sign, you know, Prosthetic puts out so much stuff. It's just like this band's never even toured, but now they're a new band and they're just snapped up by a label. And I feel like that's become more over as, you know, as like punk and metal gets more popular, you know, it does become more business. And everyone's looking for the next big thing where, you know, they've hit a few bands and then it's given them more leverage and more money. I mean, I think about how many things labels like Relapse put out 15 years ago. It's minuscule to how much content they pump out today, you know?
That's true. Yeah, I agree with that. You know, and in some ways it dilutes the quality of the releases, I think, you know?
Yeah, for sure. You know, like, I mean, it's hard to keep up. Honestly, it's hard to keep up. You know, I do music ordering, but it's hard to, like, you know, every month there's just so many releases. And I'm not talking, you know, I wish my label was at a point where I could just sign band after band after band and put a bunch of stuff out. I don't have that kind of money. No one cares. You know, I don't have that much time even to do it if I did. So, but like, you know, Profound Lore, Dark Descent, Relapse, Prosthetic, Season and Mist, it's just so much, you know, where because vinyl's hot, you know, I feel like a lot of the extreme metal music is way more popular right now. Like death metal is super popular, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
And everyone's getting on the game, you know, hoping for the next big band, you know?
Have you heard Axioma that's on Translation Lost?
I have not.
I recommend them, man. They're it's Aaron from Keelhaul is in it.
Oh, okay. I love Keelhaul.
Yeah. That's why I brought it up. And
yep.
I just had him on as a guest, and they have a brand new record that came out called Sepsis, and it's amazing. It's great. It's one of my top 10 of the year actually right now.
Okay, I will check that out.
Yeah,
Keelhaul is fucking great.
Yeah,
all those escape artists, like that label was just. I felt like no one really appreciated that label.
You're probably right.
a label like. I mean, you just, yeah. I mean, yeah, ISIS, but not like, you know, as ISIS continued, they got, you know, no one really cared when Escape Artist was putting it out as much. But yeah, Playing Enemy, Keelhaul, Anodyne, just phenomenal bands ahead of their time.
Well, ISIS was big as soon as they came out. You know what I mean? Like, I remember back in the day, like, you know, because of all the stuff Aaron did with Hydra Head, and like, it was an event when they first played their first shows. You know, like, people already knew about the band. You know, it was like one of these deals where there was like a ready-made crowd. You know, I mean, Aaron at that point, Hydra Head had worked with like Cave In and Piebald and you know, Converge and all these bands, and all those kids were primed up, and it was like, you know, oh yeah, Aaron Hydra Head has a band, and it was like right there, boom, everyone was into it right away, you know. So they you know, they were like one of the bands that put Escape Artist on the map in a lot of ways, you know, and they were like the outlier because they already had like a very big fan base, you know.
Yeah.
You know, and they went on to do like great things, man, you know?
Yeah. Which, you know, that's something, it's kind of funny because that like network, ooh, think about that whole thing. There's really pre-social media.
Yeah, definitely.
PR,
like, way before that. I mean, there was no social media in like 1997, man. That was like nothing. It was nothing like that.
Yeah, there's no social media. There's no like really like labels paying PR or anything. And that's just like something that I feel like it's kind of like a loss. And I feel like, you know, I don't want to be like, well, back in my day, but it's just, I feel like part of it, I don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of new kids discovering bands, you know, so, and that's awesome. But it feels like, I feel like more bands get lost in the mix now. I guess that's where I'm kind of going with this.
You're probably right about that. I think you're right. Yeah.
So many premieres every day, you know. I follow Invisible Oranges and No Clean Singing, and it's every day there's just premiere after premiere after premiere, and it's just like, man, I bet a ton of these bands are great, but I just don't have the time, you know?
Yeah. Well, some of the beauty about that stuff that was going on in the 90s was, you know, just getting back to Hydra Head again, you know, the artwork was... That was, I'm going to say this, man, like about independent labels back in the day. You had like SST and all this other stuff, super DIY, doing everything like quick and dirty, getting it out there. Boom. You know, like one insert with the lyrics and all that, done, you know. It was the 90s is when independent labels, and maybe it was the advent of, you know, using Photoshop and stuff like that. But that's when I feel like releases really started being artful in the way they put their packaging together. And I think a lot of that was started with Hydra Head and Turner. You know,
I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron had like a fine arts background, you know, and he was a very tactile person, and he approached the layout and everything in like this very tactile, you know, creative sort of approach, you know.
Yep, I agree with that. And, you know, Hydra Head, there's I felt like Second Nature was another label like that.
Totally. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And, yeah. And I, you know, I think back and like, the thing I think that sets them out, like, you know, I feel like a lot of the stuff, like when Death Wish started, the art all looked very similar. You knew it was on Death Wish. You knew Jake Bannon did the art, where I feel like Hydra Head didn't. Like, it had a style that it looked cool, but not everything looked similar. And I think that's maybe as I'm just scrolling through some Hydra Head stuff. It's just like, it doesn't all look similar, but it all looks interesting.
I would say that you can even look at some of the artwork, and I think there is a bit of a similarity between some of the stuff, but
for sure,
there's like eras though, you know?
Yeah.
Like there's different eras of the labels, you know, creative vision, you know, and there's, in the beginning, it was like a lot of the stuff was like hand assembled, like the 6 going on 7, you know, 7 inches and stuff were like constructed out of paper, basically, you know, and
oh yeah.
And then there was, and you know, it's funny how powerful Aaron Turner is, or was, or it still is, I guess, you know, like, especially in the 90s, like so many people followed that dude's every move, man. When it came to, even when ISIS happened, boom, there was a million bands that sounded just like them, you know?
Yeah.
Layout and artwork wise, it's like, okay, Aaron's doing this, so suddenly all these labels are copying him. You know,
Yep. And even the packaging.
Yeah, the packaging.
The die cuts.
Yep, the die cuts, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, the OB strip type stuff. Like, yeah, it's just one of my favorite metal bands is Cult of Luna, and the only reason I ever got into Cult of Luna is because I bought that Hydra Head 7-inch.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, totally. All those records are great, man. Definitely.
It was never on my radar. I bought it because I fucking love botching Cave-In. Like Cable, and Keelhaul and Coalesce, and it's just like, well, what's this? This is a 7-inch at a record store that's on Hydra Head. I've never heard of this band, but I'm gonna buy it. Yeah,
that's cool, man. That's exactly kind of like you can rely on the label to deliver you stuff that you're going to enjoy, regardless of what it is, and that, I don't know if that's gotten diluted over the years. I mean, if you follow metal labels, yeah, you'll get like Season of Mist, you'll get like dark, blackened, metal,
Yeah.
But if some other maybe other labels don't have that same identity anymore, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's hit or miss. I mean, I haven't put out everything on my label in the same genre, nor would I guess I wouldn't want to. But I definitely think there's the importance of labels that do.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite releases over the years? I mean, you have put out a lot of stuff, man. Like Treaty Versailles, like a bunch of things.
Yeah. So, I mean, the stuff that I put out all early still was just, the Vita Blue 10 Grand, the Forcella Ford, the Spirit of Versailles. Those were like some of my favorite bands, like when I was getting into that kind of music, which I'm going to use the word screamo for better or worse. The 90s screamy hardcore, we'll say that.
Yeah.
Screamo. Yeah. So to get to put out records for those bands was just, awesome. And I was booking shows, and that's how almost everything came together on my label, with a few exceptions. There was, where, I did a Caligari CD, and they played with the Abandoned Hearts Club, and Terry Taylor said, I think you would love this. And I fucking loved it, and I got a hold of them to reissue, the EP, like, that they just self-released and made, however many hundred of, So there's a few things like that, but most of it is people that were coming through my town, or once I moved to Sioux Falls, there were bands, that, like Sinking Steps, Rising Eyes, and it was close knit to Omaha, where like Back When, and Eyes of Veronica and stuff. And there's just such a good like Midwest, network, in the 2003 to 2006, 7-ish era. Like, it was just, there's so many interesting bands with like good DIY ethics, and I think I attribute a lot of that to Level Plane,
Oh yeah, that was another powerhouse.
It's just so much good stuff coming out on that. It was just nonstop, and again, also just not. That's probably the biggest influence on my label. Not when I first started, but as it moved into doing it for a few years, they'd put out bands that they didn't have a sound, per se, but it was all kind of similar scene, so like they do like some more shoegazy stuff, or even like the gospel record,
right?
More proggy. Like it's great though, yeah. And then I loved Hot Cross, Seisha, Neil Perry, all that stuff.
The first Tombs was on Level Plane.
Yeah.
It's like
very different.
way out of print, but like
very different too. It's just like you can see where your band is going, for sure on it. But that's a great record too. Like it's that would be just like the Level Plane era just really like opened it up, and I think inspired so many bands, especially in the Midwest, and it was just easy for bands to come through, and you meet these bands, and they're similar age as me, and that it was real, just so easy to find cool bands and put out records, whether anyone cared or not is, here nor there. But I think some of the favorite things, it's so hard to pick, but the Melt Banana record I did is one of my favorite. That's
incredible. Yeah,
I love that band, and the whole story with that is I've been trying forever to book them, and I remember they toured with Breathe or Resist, and I booked Breathe or Resist, but Melt Banana's agent didn't want to book Sioux Falls, so they played Rapid City instead for who knows what reason. And Breathe or Resist played in Sioux Falls, and actually it was like Renner outside, like 20 minutes outside of Sioux Falls, and there's like 200 kids or something, and I was like, God, Melt Banana, there's no way they're doing that in Rapid, like we're a bigger scene, like just couldn't get them to do it. And then I finally got the booking agent to book Sioux Falls. They booked Rapid City too, so that I went to Rapid City the day before to see Melt Banana, and I was booked. They're playing in Sioux Falls, the show I was doing the next day. So I drove out there, and I met a girl that booked shows out there, because she came into the record store like a few months earlier and was asking about, the local scene in Sioux Falls. And we got talking, and, probably MySpace friends or something.
MySpace.
And so I hit her up, and I crashed on her floor, and, she's super nice. And everyone was really nice in Rapid City. I went to there, and I talked to Mel and I go, oh, I'm booking your show tomorrow in Sioux Falls. You can stay with me. I owned a house in Sioux Falls, and I was like, you guys, you're good to stay with me. And then they played the show. It was really good. They played I booked them after that again, and they played Sioux Falls even after I stopped doing shows and stuff too. So, it ended up being a good market for them, but they stayed with me. And I remember, I was just showing them around my house, and they're like, it's a 4-bedroom house, which in Sioux Falls is dirt cheap, in 2007, my mortgage payment was like $700,
Wow, dude.
House, right?
That's like my electric bill right now.
Yeah, right? Yeah, exactly. Like, it's fucking crazy. And I remember they're like, oh, you do a record label? Because I was showing my house, like, what, you do a record label? I had a room full of CDs and records. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, do you want to put out a Melt Banana record? I was like, fuck yeah. And then
awesome.
I had Aaron Horkey Prince, who's a friend of mine. He's from, southern Minnesota too. And I had some Aaron Horkey Prince hanging up, and they were just like, who's the artist? And I was like, Aaron Horkey. Like, will he do the artwork for the record? I was like, well, I can ask him, like, yeah, sure. I'll ask him, and he ended up doing it. And that's by far probably my favorite thing I've ever put out.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, that's a great one, man. They're
such a, probably the most established band that I'd worked with too, over all the years. Like, they already have the fan base. They're already a kind of a big band, but not really, big in the underground scene.
Yeah, no, for sure they are. For sure.
Yeah.
Melt Banana is like a bigger band, definitely.
Yeah. And you know what? I've kept in touch with them, and we did talk about doing a second record. That was a while back. So who knows? Maybe it'll happen someday. I feel like they haven't put out as much material as like the last few years as they had, or last like 6 years or something as they did previous. So.
That'd be cool. I would totally be up for that, man.
Yeah,
for sure.
What other like really favorite? I mean, the Amon Ra CD.
Oh yeah. That
it was the first U.S. release. Just such an incredible band, and they're just not as big in the U.S., which is a shame, I think. But I think they'll also get there. I think they'll be as big in the U.S. as they are in Europe eventually, because they're such an incredible band. I remember Rusty Steele from Battlefields. They played shows with them, and he was just like, "Yeah, they don't have any label in the U.S. You should do these." They're looking to put out a CD, and I was just like, "I never heard of them," And I was like, "Well, I've known Rusty so long. He's got a pretty good feel of what I'm into." And then Colin sent me their CDs. And I was like, this is so fucking good. I remember getting in the mail and putting it in my car, driving home. And I think like my parents were coming down to visit me. And I was just like, sat in the driveway, and I was like, this is so good. Like,
the only time Anodyne ever toured Europe, we played with Amon Ra in Belgium. It was pretty fucking
oh, that's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah.
So I only saw him. I saw him play on that Voivod tour. It's the only time I actually ever saw him. And I thought it was one of the most incredible shows I've ever seen in my life. Like, top 10 performance. I remember talking to Colin afterwards. He's like, oh, this isn't even good compared to, you have to come to Europe to see us.
I agree.
Like,
I agree.
whole different thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, great. Now I have to do that someday. You know?
When Anodyne played with them, they didn't have the whole thing that they're doing now, but like Tombs has played with Amon Ra in Europe a couple times, and yeah, it's definitely like a whole different thing over there.
Yeah, so that's on my bucket list. Someday I will get to Europe and I will see Amon Ra play over there, because yeah, he said it's just, and they have like, it's like a weird religion. They have like this follower, this fan base that like lives and breathes Amon Ra. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a little weird, I think, but
yeah,
but
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but it's to each his own. There's weirder religions, that worship a guy who's nailed to a cross. It's kind of weird too.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to think other that Ken Mode record I did is in my favorite releases. Venerable.
Did so when I met up with, after I saw you, I saw or before I saw you and Jesse around the same time.
Yeah.
Now, did you guys actually hang out in Winnipeg?
Yeah, we did, totally. Yeah,
right,
we got some food, and we went and saw the band Hexus play.
Nice.
In Winnipeg, and yeah, it was a good time. Like, that dude is, I feel like when I think of people that are, in it for life, and just similar to me, I think of you, I think Jesse, I think it's great. I look through his CDs, and it's like, I have the same CDs, it's just like same era buying, just the same music interest. It's just so cool to like meet somebody like that, like, that even before, I ever met him, he's into a lot of the same stuff that I'm into. It's just it, and then he's still into it today,
Yeah,
still
totally.
into the same stuff. It's just like so cool. Sheen, his brother, awesome as well. Like, that whole band are sweet dudes, and yeah, I'm excited to hear their new record. He's gonna give it to me up there, and he totally forgot. So yeah, that I love that album. Trying to think of what else I put out that are my favorites without hurting any feelings. The Buried Inside record that Relapse did the CD, and I did the vinyl.
Right.
That's one of my favorites. The Woman is Earth records, I really love them. That's the last thing I put out. I've done 4 or 5 records for them, 3 full lengths and EP, and I reissued their first full length on vinyl. And I just think that band is just they're from Rapid City, and they're just, I don't know, they're phenomenal musicians, and all their records are a little different, but there's so many like influences, and not even intentional probably, I hear in their music. Like, I hear a lot of like the screamo stuff, even though they were never into that stuff. I know their sister was into like hot cross and stuff, but you can see some of that crosses over. But it's like atmospheric black metal stuff without getting too cheesy,
Right on.
like no fiddles and
Fiddles.
and like animal noises in the forest in between songs or anything like that. And not picking on anyone that has that stuff. I like a lot of bands that like that, but it's just a little more straightforward, I guess. And it's they're really good. Trying to think what else I put out. I really love that Anodyne CD.
No, don't say that, man. Come on, don't. I hope you weren't. I wish you wouldn't bring that up, but
it's It's great. That is a good EP. I think that off the top of my head, this is probably my all-time favorite. I mean, there's nothing I've really put out that I really don't like, and I think that's cool. You know?
No, totally. I mean, that would suck, you know, if you had, I hate this one thing I did like 10 years ago.
You know, there's nothing I hate. There's stuff that I don't know who's ever going to listen to this, but, you know, Hugh Corrupts, I did a 10 label split with that Level, like Greg from Level Plane told me I should be part of. So they're looking for another label. That band didn't really age with me very well.
Oh, yeah. I can see that for sure.
To be fair, and yeah, they were great live and entertaining, but listening to them is just, you know, if I listen to it now, I'm just like, that's probably my least favorite thing I put out.
It's a great name, though. I always love that name, He Who Corrupts.
Yeah, and the whole shtick, you know, they had that whole joke corporate thing going on, presence and persona and stuff, and they still do it online, and it's funny. And you know, I'm not a big joke band person. I like my music a little more serious, but there's, you know, I appreciate a good joke too. You know, so yeah, it was like, you know, when I was younger, I thought it was funnier, and I liked it more than I do now, I guess.
Online, where can people find you as far as, like, you know, to order records and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so I'm not very good at well, the label's a hobby for me, and the older I get, the busier I get with work and just mostly just work, honestly. As vinyl industry is popular, our record stores that I work at is just nonstop busy. People selling collections and buying stuff and trying to order records when you can't get them and finding them. So that's pretty much the majority of my existence is working. My job, which I love my job. So I'm not very good at running a label. I do mail order. I mean, I ship mail orders fast and everything like that. But Bandcamp, initrecords.bandcamp.com would be the best, but I know that not everything is up there. I also have a Discogs. You can find Init Records stuff on Discogs, and you can find my stuff where I sell it also. Especially stuff like that I don't have up on Bandcamp. But the Bandcamp is probably the best. There's a Facebook page, Init Records. And there's a website that hasn't been updated forever and has no content. But it's initrecords.net, and it will link you to the Facebook and the Bandcamp. So that's probably the easiest.
Right on, man. Cool. So, yeah. Check it out. And Steve, thanks for catching up, man. It was good talking to you again as usual, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, for sure.
Man.
Always good, and I'm looking forward to Tombs rolling through my town again soon, before the end of the year, and more frequently, because it's always a good time talking and hanging out.
Hell yeah, man. Take care.
Yeah. All right, you too.
Don't you